Greetings and salutations! Astartes Part 4. Everybody is asking me to have a look at this, so I figured I would. Honestly, I've been quite hesitant to talk about the Astartes parts, with the exception, indeed, with the video I did with Sargon quite a while ago, where we looked at all the ones that have been released up until that point, because, well, I do know a thing or two about 40k, this is true, but I also studied 3D arts and design for a couple of years, and so I have a general idea of how 3D works and how to make 3D, and just how amazing this 3D is, and so I feel like an amateur when I'm talking about it, because it's so, the 3D is amazing. I mean, you all know that much, definitely. And I've also felt like it's a little out of the wheelhouse of what I normally do, you know? Because I'm not necessarily anything and everything 40k. Like, I don't comment on models, for example, or Games Workshop news most of the time, stuff like that. But everybody wants to see my take on this, and so I will give it to you, though I will be taking a slightly different approach. I mean, you all know this is amazing. You don't need me telling you it's amazing again. So instead, we're gonna theorize a little bit around the story and maybe a little bit around the feasibility of extending this project into other things as well. So, without further ado, let's have a look. And right away, a pause. Didn't take long, did it? But this thing here. This is a vital piece of the speculation about the story, because it has a very peculiar shape, and its location in the ship is also quite telling. This is clearly the objective for the Astartes. And the opposition, like these guys here, they were chasing a bunch of private army-looking guys out to fight off the Astartes. Relatively well-equipped guys as well, especially for, the crew of a ship. And they definitely weren't shipboard defense, because shipboard defenders don't use automatic weapons like autoguns or lasguns, because that shit has a nasty habit of wrecking the internals of a ship, and they would definitely not use something heavy like an autocon cannon, as we saw, or multi-lasers. They would be equipped with stuff like shotguns or heavy-duty flechette cannons, that kind of stuff. That's what they use for shipboard defense. Projectile weapons like autocans or heavy bolters only in the most dire of circumstances, which you certainly could argue that this is. But they are trying to run away from something as well. They are fleeing from the Astartes, who boarded their ship via assault ram, it appeared, and an assault ram escorted by an Imperial Navy Thunderbolt at that, so it's a bit of a mixed force that's after them. Both Astartes and Navy, which suggests the inclusion of certain inquisitorial elements. So, this is the objective. The Astartes want to get control of it, and the defenders want to keep control of it. And the two stars, quote-unquote, of today's show, the Psykers. These guys are quite interesting because there is quite a lot of stuff we can read into them and their presence. Now, the first fact is that they're Psykers, which are rare. Very rare. And additionally, there is strong, how do I put it, circumstantial evidence to suggest that they might be related as well, or at the very least bound together in some fashion via ritual, whilst there still not being any overt signs of chaos influence on them. No mutations, no sigils, no nothing. And neither were there any clear signs of that on the other defenders either, which suggests that these are not heretics, at the very least not overtly. Perhaps renegades? Seems more likely, but then a renegade faction with access to two Psykers. That's rare. I don't believe that these guys are the bosses of the whole contingent. Just because they don't strike me as the type, really, and also because these things here, these are psychic hoods. And they're not grown, they're not a part of them, these are not a mutation, this is a hood, as we will see in a moment, I believe. There you go. Now, the little sparkly effect is basically just, this is psychic energy. You can't, generally speaking, see it, but, it can have a static electricity effect, sure. And now you can see the wires heading into their hoods. And these things are almost certainly psychic hoods, which act both as a focus to their psychic powers and also as a mean of controlling their psychic powers, making sure they don't run out of control, run berserk, and start affecting either one another or, well, everyone, or, rip a hole in reality, shit like that. Stuff you don't really want to have happened. It also appears as if they are linked directly to them. Now, this is a little interesting because it would be a tad unusual unless they were bonded, basically servants of some other thing that force them to constantly be connected to their powers. It is also entirely possible that this can be disconnected, mind you, and that this is literally just, their battle gear. They can take off the mask and everything else. Possible. Let's move on a little bit more. Here you also see another very interesting thing. Note, this guy has his right hand, or right arm. This guy has his left arm. But they do not appear to have the other arm. Now, it is possible that it is hidden beneath the robes, but there isn't even an opening for an arm on this side of the robe. Which seems odd, seems dumb, frankly, if they have two functioning limbs. And yet you can also see, you'll see it better in a frame later on, but if there was an arm here, it should be sticking out further like this. They're standing at a ready position with their arms out to their sides, and yet it stops there, suggesting that the limb has been severed at round about the elbow or so. And for one to have the right arm and one to have the left arm, and both of them to be psyches, coinky dink, I doubt it. I very much so doubt it. Here you see it as well. This does not look to be a fully functioning limb, does it? Or here. I'm pretty sure these are, cut off. Oh, another thing. I'm going to try to keep the fanboying to a minimum through this video because, again, you've been told this thing is good. You can see this thing is good. But I love how they do the bolters in this one. I really do. Just the roar of them. That is so good. That is so very, very good. And how the psychic defends against it too, with his psychic barrier catching each individual rocket-propelled grenade as it goes towards him. Ah, smoke effect after detonate. Like how the smoke just flies off their psychic shield. Oh. Art. Literal fucking art. Now also, take note of how the Astartes are attacking here. So you've got two guys up top, firing down on them, pinning one of them. And then you've got a further two guys off to the other side, placing them under fire again. And it's continuous fire as well. The moment the first guy is done with his barrage, as you can see here, he moves off to the side and lets his battle brother move in and fire off his barrage. This is very clearly pre-planned, and I don't think they expect this to kill them, because of course you've also got the two other Astartes that are running straight towards them, trying to bring them into close quarters combat. This suggests that the Astartes know what these two guys are. They know they're psychers. They have access to some kind of targeting package or information about this ship and their query, to the point that they know that there are two psychers involved. And so they've developed a plan to try and deal with them, with suppressive fire distracting them from a multi-pronged attack in close quarters combat. Which brings up yet further questions. Who would have access to that kind of information? The Inquisition theory is certainly strengthened, in my opinion. And now we come to actually just a hint of criticism. I'm sorry, just a hint, okay? The way the Astartes run. Now, I don't know if this is motion captured or not. Perhaps the creator has answered that, but I haven't seen it if he has. But Astartes don't run quite like this, at the very least not when they're at a full-on sprint. Because the Astartes' physiology is very different from humans, and they move quite differently as well, due to their extraordinarily muscled bodies. For example, when they're expected to travel long distances unaided by mechanical means, they enter into a kind of a battle march where they use their extraordinarily overdeveloped leg muscles to propel themselves forwards in kind of these leaping bounds, where they send all of the energy into one leg and just kind of jump forward. And then the other. And they enter into a rhythm where they're doing this, where they travel ridiculously quickly, and it doesn't tire the Astartes in the slightest. They can do that for days, essentially. And when they're at a flat-out sprint like this, they wouldn't be running quite like this, like, arms pumping, etc. Because that's going to throw off your center of balance, because you got to remember, the Astartes' greatest weight is the power plant on their back. And then the chassis, the cuirass, they have a very different center of gravity to us, more towards the back rather than our front. And so running like this would be impractical. What the Astartes do instead is they lean further forward when they're at a dead-out sprint, and they use each leg at a time to kick off the ground, propelling them forward in these huge leaps almost. Not in the air, mind you, but like this, They plant a leg and go whoosh, and then they plant the other and propel themselves further forward. This allows them to both accelerate and maintain a ridiculous speed. I mean, and Astartes is able to close a gap between him and his opponents in an obscenely short amount of time. But I did have to provide a little bit of criticism, otherwise I wouldn't be arch now, would I? Also, now let's have a quick look at his mask, shall we? Because so far there's been basically no Chaos iconography whatsoever, and this mask with its intricate patterns is probably the closest we've come to anything at least resembling Chaos iconography. Now, I have access to a fair few little books with Chaos runes in them, and even whilst looking pretty damn closely at this freeze frame, pretty much this one right here actually, I cannot positively identify this as Chaos script. It's on portions it looks kind of like it, like this area right here. This looks kind of flowing, almost a tad bit organic, which is a prospect ability, God, English, which is a type of Chaos script. Chaos script is very chaotic, I guess would be the word, but almost organic, soft, flowing. It's not hard and angular like, for example, Dwarven runes. It's far softer than that. It's like it's kind of like it has been created by an entity that does not quite understand itself. A beastman language. Beastmen don't understand how to write, and yet they have a runic form of communication. They can write in runes, not because they know how to write, but because this is how the energy within them manifests itself. A universal language unique to Chaos, often referred to as the Dark Tongue, and also the language in which their rituals are written. And whilst I can't entirely, eliminate the possibility that this is Chaos script, at least to some extent, it doesn't look like it, and it is not overtly so. Not clearly. So again, I don't think these guys are heretics. I don't think they're overly chaotic. I think they're probably rebels, or dare I say it, freedom fighters? Now, this part, right about here, the Imperium has a way of grading its psykers, and other psykers as well, depending on how powerful they are. These guys here are probably Delta or Gamma grade psykers. I'd probably say high Delta to low Gamma, in that they can freeze an Astartes and can potentially also kill him if given enough time and space, but it's clearly not easy for him. Now, he's sweating at the brow here to stop this guy, and it takes him quite a long time to even begin to crack open even the weakest points of his armor, which are the lenses on his helmet. If he was a beta, or God help the poor little Astartes, an alpha-class psyker, he could basically turn this poor Astartes inside out with a flick of his wrist. That is how powerful some psykers in 40k can be, 40k. Excuse the somewhat off-the-cuff nature of this, but I wanted to have this just be kind of a stream of consciousness thing rather than a scripted thing, you know? Now, that is not to say that they are weak psykers. Even psykers of this grade, and especially psykers capable of combat to the degree that these guys are very rare and very precious as well. So whoever has employed these, because I still think they are probably controlled by someone else, has a serious amount of clout somewhere. Right. I'll let it play there for a little bit, because the next part is quite speculative, but I'm going to explain like why I think what I think for this area here. So let me see if I can find a part where we can see his shoulder decently. Ah, here we go. So he has a marking here. Now, some people have suggested this might be an eye, but I think this is simply just the same mark as we saw the guardsmen carrying on their shoulder pads in part 2, I believe. And another, very, how do I put it? Not clearly chaotical, is what I'd probably say again. It looks more like a governmental symbol to me, the kind of thing you'd see on a flag or a coat of arms, kinda. But these psykers are very clearly connected in some way, in my opinion. The moment this guy becomes under attack because he's busy pinning down and trying to kill the first Astartes, his buddy steps in and defends him against a hail of bolter shells. That's not easy to do. That requires quite a lot of coordination, training perhaps, or possibly even a psychic bond between them. This might be the reason why they are missing different limbs, that they have been soul bonded somewhere together. Further evidence of that is that when this guy finally manages to get his bolter into position and fire off a little burst, it appears as if he might have been able to partially at least block the projectile, as this bluish glow here might suggest that he managed to toss up an energy shield just before the bolt fully hammered into his flesh and detonated. And another reason for that is because if that had hit him in the shoulder like it looks like, half his body would probably be gone. And the moment he's knocked back, in the time it takes the Astartes to bring his knife from a fully, pulled back, ready to strike position, As we see, let's see. There we go. Here, all the way back there. And until he brings it very close, there, that is a fraction of a second. In that period of time, this guy's companion has managed to figure out the situation, realize what's going on, immediately refocus his intention from the enemy who just fired at him and towards this Astartes. In the fraction of a second that this guy is knocked out. I believe that these guys might be brothers, and that they are sharing a very personal psychic link with one another, and this is why they are able to react so quickly, so precisely, and so flawlessly to each other's predicaments, while still they are somewhat limited by their psychic potential. It requires one of them's whole fulfilled attention to restrain one Astartes, and with both of them attacking him, they've finally managed to crack a single eyepiece. They don't even overly damage it, they crack the lens. That's all they managed to achieve, together. And by the time this guy notices that he's getting attacked from behind, he swings around with some beautiful combat reflexes, by the way, and throws up an attack, in a possible block or maneuver to defend himself against an enemy to his rear. A very honed move. Like, this is a combat reflex right here. So these guys have received quite a lot of training, and somewhat successfully as well. He batters away the Astartes' bolt pistol, and judging by the sparks, I'm thinking force or possibly power weapon, judging by the impact. And hell, even the simple fact that the weapon was knocked away at all. You can also see what appears to be a part of possibly the bolt pistol, possibly the Psyker's weaponry, a bit unclear, being knocked loose there. And, baseline human doesn't have the strength to do that. It doesn't have the strength to knock the weapon out of a hand of an Astartes, unless that is a power or force weapon. But, see, I'm going to fanboy a little bit again. The way that Astartes does Space Marine is so beautiful, because they are consummate warriors. As impressive as this guy's combat reflexes was, realizing that an enemy is closing in on behind him and immediately responding to that threat, the Space Marine acts even quicker. The millisecond he realizes that his leading weapon has been taken out of the equation, he immediately grabs his dagger, double-handed, increasing the weight and momentum behind it so that even if the Psyker manages to react right now, at the last second, it'll be too late. The momentum has already built up, and the knife will go right through his brain. By the way, this part right here, favorite part, because any other, Hollywood shit would shaky cam this out of existence, but here, you see how rock solid the Astartes grip is. That is just one flat motion. Love it. Absolutely love it. And then, when he cuts this, the psychic hood, this is probably also a dampener, mind you. And so when this is destroyed, you see the psychic backlash there affecting his friend, to the point where it actually, let's see if we can catch it, it seems to blow out his energy. Because you can see just for a hint of a frame there, if I can find it, there. No more energy is coursing up through his hood there. Now, this is further evidence, in my opinion, that these guys are bonded, because very powerful psychers can create essentially a ripple of psychic force if they die, or if they have particularly powerful emotions, stuff like that. But these guys aren't that kind of a level of psyker. And just the destruction of the psychic hood, especially after a knife has been rammed through the poor bastard's brain, is very unlikely to cause this kind of psychic feedback, and definitely not powerful enough to basically knock this guy out and stun him for just a tiny little second, which is all the Astartes, of course, needs. But if these guys were bonded, if they were family or perhaps, tied together via a ritual which cost them an arm each to make them closer, to a single portion of a greater whole, for example, then the death of that comrade would certainly create a psychic backlash, unquestionably so. And, of course, that is all the time the Astartes needs. And then there's the vault. The vault. Now, there's a few things this could be. Let's consider the Astartes' objective here. They are sent out towards a hostile spaceship that appears to be in flight. When we see them boarding it, the spaceship isn't attacking the Astartes' ship. It appears to be, it is moving through a meteor field as if it is trying to remain undetected. My theory then is that it's trying to get away from pursuit. And if the Astartes are trying to stop it from fleeing, the natural target would either be the bridge, which is likely to be one of the most heavily guarded objectives, as it is usually fortified, simply because it is such a vulnerable area, with heavy weaponry and very limited access routes and so on. Alternatively, they could be going for the Enginorum and try and knock out the ship's power plant, its plasma reactors. And this could potentially be the shielded entrance to a plasma reactor, where you have a very heavily armored gateway where you can enter into it for maintenance and emergency nonsense. Possible. But it doesn't look like a reactor. Reactors are usually cylindrical in shape or inhabit vast cavernous spaces within the ship. It should also be covered in Mechanicus insignia. Even, Chaos or Heretical or, Renegade forces would have that kind of sign on it. Because the Mechanicus and worship of the machine god, and how machines function with machine spirits, is kind of universal in humanity, both in chaotic and in imperial humanity. And yet, there doesn't seem to be anything like that here. No cog symbols, no nothing. So I think, based upon its peculiar shape, and the way it's set inside the ship, with these huge dampeners around it. These look like hydraulic dampeners to me to lessen the shock on the vault itself. And it's in the depth of the ship, in one of the safest, most armored areas, as if they're trying to protect it against enemy weapons fire attacking the ship. I think it then is a navigator sanctum for 3 reasons. 1, it's heavily armored and heavily protected in what appears to be the center of the ship. 2, it's spherical, which is usually the shape of a navigator's sanctum. It also has these things right here. These look to me like psychic dampeners, which would be covering a navigator's sanctum, to diminish the effect that random thoughts of the crew members and the constant buzzing of their minds has upon the navigator. Essentially, a navigator's sanctum is a sanctum in the most literal term possible. It is their own little world within the ship, and it can vary considerably in size. This is a smaller sanctum, probably around 2 decks or so in size, whilst the properly huge ones for the higher level navis nobilitae on, capital class vessels can be covering like 10 decks, massive palaces within the ship, filled with all of the luxury items and wonderful things that navigators can afford with their ridiculous paydays. And it would be covered with the psychic inhibitors, because navigators are very sensitive to just the minds of other people. Even being on a spaceship is kind of like being in a locker room with people shouting for them. Thousands of minds constantly sending off their own little signals, constantly sending and babbling and wobbling and shouting in your head. And so you'd probably want a place with a little bit of privacy. especially when you're driving through the warp, which is another reason for those dampeners, to ensure that whoever is within will not draw the attention of certain beasties swimming through the immaterial ocean. So, my money is on a navigator's sanctum. As for why the Astartes would want that, well, without a navigator, the ship will not be able to enter the warp. They will have no way to navigate in the warp. Now, you could still jump in the warp, but it would be suicide, and you would have no way of navigating and no way of exiting the warp again. And hell, without a navigator, full stop, as if they kill him, yeah, they can't really go anywhere. And so, if the Astartes wishes to make sure that the ship can't escape, it would be a logical target. Because fiddling around with the plasma drives, well, you know, having a firefight in the plasma drive room, potentially bad idea. Potentially very bad idea. And attacking the bridge as well, since this is a fairly small Astartes complement, as we see a bit later here. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I think maybe 5? Yes, 5. So this is a combat squad, basically, of 5 Astartes. Now, as we've seen throughout this series, 5 Astartes is a pretty sizable force in and of themselves, but a starship's bridge, that can be a nasty objective, even for Space Marines, whilst this place, well, as you can see, it has far less in the way of natural defenses. And the defenders of the ship clearly knew that as well, as they deployed their psyches here, along with a considerable portion of their mortal defenders. Of course, it's also possible that I am vastly overthinking this, and this is simply just a very large, fancy-ass vault, within which there is a magical doodah, which the Astartes would like to possess. That too is entirely possible. Anywho, I think I'll wrap it up there. So that's my theory. This is why I think they're on the ship. I still think they're probably with the Inquisition, or maybe even possibly some kind of enforcement chapter, because look at their heraldry here. A skull held tightly, almost as if it's being crushed, in the grasp of an armored gauntlet. That's an interesting piece of iconography. That suggests, maybe to me, that they're a chapter specializing a bit in suppressing overly free-minded populations, perhaps. Or maybe that they're a bit fond of the Inquisition, although not quite to the extent of the Red Hunters with the inquisitorial eye in their iconography. Let's see. I'm also trying to look at their shoulder pad here. I know there's a frame where we see it quite clearly. Ah, there you go. And there you see it also in their chapter iconography there. Since, of course, often the Imperial Aquila is stapled on their cuirass. Not always, mind you. Excuse me. So that's a bit interesting. I think it would be really, really cool if the Astartes ended up not necessarily being the good guys here. Because, well, that's 40k. And if nothing else, the creator of these videos have shown that he knows 40k. He has an intimate knowledge and understanding of the setting. Absolutely so. And with that, I'll bid you all adieu. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Until then, have a good day.